We're in Davos, Switzerland at the Lighthouse by Lightspeed talking to business leaders trying to change the world through technology. Up today, Francesco Sciortino, co-founder and CEO of Proxima Fusion. His startup is building stellarators for fusion power plants to provide unlimited clean energy for all of humanity. Okay, but does he have a podcast, Toby?
Well, he explained fusion energy and plasma physics to us in a way that didn't melt our minds. So yeah, I would say a podcast could potentially be in his future. One that, if all goes well, will derive its energy from a Proxima Fusion stellarator. So without further ado, here's Francesco.
Francesco, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So Proxima Fusion's goal, and I think I'm getting this right, is to produce stellarators for fusion power plants to provide unlimited clean energy for all of humanity. Why not tackle a bigger problem?
That's right. Yeah, in fact, we are also building the most powerful magnets on the planet. We're building the most advanced, maybe engineering design framework that you can make, and we're thinking about deploying a stellarator to the moon. No, the latter is not true. The rest is.
Maybe someday.
You can convince us of anything. Can you just break down what a stellarator is for those of us who don't know what it is?
Yep. So it's a donut with magnets, but these magnets are not flat like in a tokamak, the more conventional option. In a stellarator, you have these magnets that are weirdly shaped, and they effectively create a spiraling magnetic field that is a magnetic bottle. So we're trying to confine hot ionized plasma, as it's called. So heavy forms of hydrogen. We get them really, really hot to 100, 150 million degrees. And when we do that inside a stellarator, we can produce fusion. So fusion is the process of joining light atoms. And if you do it well, you can get an enormous amount of energy. The amount of energy in a spoonful of fusion fuel, we like to say, is about 13 tons of coal equivalent of energy. So if we manage to do this, it's a big deal.
How many stellarators are in a power plant?
Just one. So
Just one.
You can think of it as a furnace. The equivalent of what you want to substitute is whatever is making lots of heat. We're trying to get that heat from fusion. And then once you have that heat, we still don't want to substitute the entire way in which a power plant works. We're focused on getting, in our case, a fusion reaction that produces neutrons, and those neutrons create, you can use them to get heat out of that.
What is the magic of the twistiness of a stellarator? Because a tokamak, which you mentioned, is more of like a flatter donut-looking shape, but a stellarator looks pretty crazy with its curvature. So tell us why that's important to have.
Yeah, so the idea of a stellarator and this spiraling magnetic field is not new. It was actually invented in 1951 at Princeton by Lyman Spitzer. And the concept is you want these particles of heavy forms of hydrogen to keep going around forever. So it's not quite a particle accelerator. It's better to think of it as a water boiler. Once you have water boiling, the particles are going in every direction, and you're trying to make sure that they stay within that boundary, but you have to create a cage because these particles are 100, 150 million degrees, which means no material is ever going to survive those kind of temperatures. So you're trying to get to a particularly precise geometry of these magnetic fields. And the devil is in the details, so we haven't actually been able to design very good stellarators until supercomputers became available. And then since the 90s, early 2000s, we learned to optimize these devices ever better. We have one particularly good stellarator on the planet. It's the Wendelstein 7X stellarator in Germany. That's where our story starts.
Take us to that, because that's actually our next question. You are maybe a spin-off or downstream of the Wendelstein experiment. You'd be shocked to know we haven't heard of it before, researching this. Explain what that was and how it kind of opened the door to more stellarators being built.
Yeah, so Wendelstein is the name of a mountain, actually, in southern Bavaria. That's where the inspiration of the project, at least in the name, the word Wendelstein describes a series of devices that have been built historically by the Max Planck Society, so something equivalent to an organization of national labs in Germany. And the series of Wendelstein stellarators were progressively more and more elaborate until we got to Wendelstein 7X, which means 7X. The short form of that is W7X. And this is by far the most advanced stellarator on the planet. And it entered operation, first blip in 2015. It really came to its full marvelous performance in 2022. And in 2022, at the same time, we saw that the physical basis of this device was solid, that a so-called QI stellarator is really promising. And we learned in the same year, more or less, that we could numerically optimize these devices to overcome the last physical drawbacks. And then what was left at that point was an understanding of trade-offs between physics, engineering, and commercial viability, and some darn hard magnets that we have to build.
If Toby and I wanted to build a stellarator in our free time, where would we start?
You have to start loving magnets, not any kind of magnets. We're looking at superconductors. So superconductors are materials that when you keep them cold enough, you can run a big current through them and they won't lose any energy. If you take these kind of materials and you manage to put them effectively in a loop and you run current in these loops, you can make magnetic fields. If you then have this computational design capability, you can use several magnets to create this stellarator cage. So it's a field that is fantastically multidisciplinary. You have to know a bunch about plasma physics. So the physics of the hot ionized matter. And then you have to know a bunch of engineering from superconductivity. So that means a lot of electromagnetism. You have to keep everything cold. So you have at the center of the plasma 150 million degrees, about a meter away, almost absolute zero. So minus 270 Celsius, give or take. So you have the highest temperature gradient in the universe. And so you can expect that not to be particularly easy.
Do you remember this craze around room temperature superconductors from a few years ago? That would make your life a lot easier, right?
For sure. If anyone finds some, point me to the Amazon link and I'll buy lots.
Did you pay attention to when there was a paper studied by some, I think, Korean scientists and we did it, we made this ferromagnet essentially float and it was downstream of these room temperature superconductors. Are you actively researching that, or is that just still kind of a pipe dream?
Now, look, the topic is very serious. Superconductors they shouldn't be thought of as mature, saturated technology. There is plenty of research worldwide on new kinds of superconductors. The superconductors that we rely on, and the several of our friendly fusion competitors are also working on, they are now industrialized. The cost has gone down massively, and that's what we need. We can't solve every problem at the same time, so we have to rely on building a supply chain. That does not mean that this is the final superconductor of humanity. So whenever somebody claims that they may have a better kind of superconductivity that goes to higher temperatures, higher than the ones that we currently work with, which are still fairly cold, minus a bunch of degrees, that's great. We need to encourage that kind of moonshot R&D. We're not going to hold our breath. We got work to do with the existing superconductors. But whenever there is a claim of some massively disruptive material technology, it's good to raise an eyebrow, then actually look into it. If you are just skeptical, you just don't move forward, yeah?
Let's talk about the policy landscape a bit. So you embarked on this journey when nuclear energy was very much not in. Now governments are changing their tune a little bit. Are you liking what you're hearing from governments around the world regarding nuclear and fusion technology?
Yeah, so I think we are in a very different spot than just a few years ago. For context, I'm based in Germany, in Munich. Proxima Fusion is headquartered in Munich. We work all across Europe. But Germany stepped out of fission just a couple of years ago. Maybe brief parenthesis, fission versus fusion, basically the opposites from a physical perspective. Fission is about splitting a heavy nucleus, whereas fusion is about joining light nuclei. The bottom line is the same. We're trying to transform mass into energy that we can use and transform into electricity or whatever you're interested in. The change that I think has happened over the last few years is, yes, about energy abundance and the need to power AI data centers and all of that. But at the same time, it's also that we now care about CO2. So I was born in Italy, in a country that gave up on fission several decades ago. So I never lived in Italy with nuclear power. There is a lot of nuclear engineering in Italy, but actually no nuclear power plants. The reason why a country like Italy stepped out of fission was not because it was post-Chernobyl and things like that, but CO2 was just not on the referendum, on the ballot. Now we care a bit more about CO2, and we care about powering humanity, dealing with the scarcity that humans are so used to. Energy is the basis of everything, not just AI, but so much of humanity doesn't have enough energy. Nuclear is definitely part of the mix. Fission is what we can deploy now, many different kind of technologies. Fusion, it's the thing of tomorrow. It's still in R&D phase. I think humanity should just hit with the biggest hammers that we got. We need to try all of these things.
So when people talk about traditional nuclear power plants, that's fission.
That's always fission. So there is no fusion power plant that has been deployed today. There are more than 50 fusion companies worldwide that are trying fusion in a wide variety of ways. That's very positive. We'll see which one gets to a commercially viable fusion device.
And how much does government policy actually influence what you're doing? It seems like it can help, but does it make or break your chances, or is that more down to like just your engineering capabilities and if you can actually do it?
It's a bit of both, right? You could also add to that money. Does financing matter? Of course, financing matters. Does policy matter? Yeah, with regulation, you can kill any technology. But also, it's worth highlighting that energy is always something that derives from countries' policies. So you're seeing this in the United States now with the US administration pushing so much on gas and oil. You're seeing that with Germany already a couple of decades ago, pushing particularly on photovoltaics. Now, different countries naturally choose different policies. Eventually, you do need the technical feasibility. And in the case of fusion, I think this gets lost a little bit in the public conversation and in startup pitches. First, you need to figure out how do you actually make it possible. Fusion is not quite the trivial technology that you just say you're going to start building power plants right and left. So feasibility first with governments that are needed to partly make the return on investments attractive, because this is not an easy, no quick, no cheap journey. So you need governments, and then you need the right regulation. The regulation, we think we figured out, it's going to be much easier than for fission.
I mean, just the promise of fusion, this clean energy for all, maybe a little even safer than fission, which could technically melt down. That's a pretty good, promise. But you touched on this, has the AI build out made more attention come to the fusion industry? Like, is the fact that these hungry data centers need more energy, has that made your life a little bit easier?
100% in terms of attention. I like to think that the attention was deserved also before, not just from a technical perspective. One should think about fusion even beyond the energy consumption. In some sense, it's an evolutionary technology. It's the thing that comes after wherever we are right now. The data centers have sort of brought momentum on the economic side. The hyperscalers are fantastic. They bring fantastic momentum to any new technology. So they're also willing to pay a premium in many cases. That's bringing attention to fusion, but to also many other energy technologies. That said, I like to remind people, there's still the vast majority of the human population does not have access to enough energy, not to speak about clean energy. So data centers, tip of an iceberg, humanity is much bigger.
So you were an academic, you were studying physics and serving as a coordinator for a task force on negative triangularity tokamak scenarios. Now you're a startup founder managing a private sector business, raising millions of dollars from venture capitalists. What was that transition like for you?
Easy peasy. Not quite. Big. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about managing teams. You do that in an academic environment or in a startup. The dynamicity of a startup is obviously very different. Communicating with investors requires understanding what are their needs. But at the end of the day, the game is go as fast as you can. That's really where the focus needs to be. A good academic also cares about producing stuff as fast as possible. The mission, in my personal journey, this was just the evolution of the same mission. I've started being interested in fusion a while ago, more than a decade ago, already from undergrad time. I had decided fusion is the one thing I want to pursue in life. When I was in 2022 at the Max Planck Society, so this national laboratory, let's call it like that, in Germany, it became clear that the path to go as fast as possible required a mix of public and private. So it's not quite the domain where you want to go full private venture capital by itself and you put yourself in a garage in San Francisco and you start playing around. This is large, it's important, it's also expensive and requires the right kind of mindset. So for us, bringing together the right partners, both from a financing perspective and from a research and development perspective, industry, governments, it's been fun. It's a completely different journey, of course, but it's pretty fun.
If you find building stellarators fun.
Oh yeah.
What did you want to do when you were an undergrad? He decided on fusion. You decided on where to find the next beer. What the heck?
Yeah.
He's changing the world.
What's an important mission?
So you spent a lot of time studying plasma. What is the coolest thing about plasma?
It's pretty hot, actually, depending on the perspective. But I would say it's some a physicist likes about plasma is the fact that they're particularly hard. This is going to terrorize many of the listeners, but the coolest thing about plasmas is that we haven't quite figured out how to simulate them at scale without burning an enormous amount of computing. Yet we have to find simplified models. Machine learning there comes in every form as surrogate models of different sorts. So it's the many scales. You want to model plasmas at a galactic scale, quite literally. So astrophysics, the space is full of plasmas. Most of the matter in the universe is in the form of a plasma. So you go from that scale all the way to the atoms that create this soup of charged particles that is what we call a plasma. That multi-scale nature, I think it's pretty cool. Not quite from a physical perspective, but intellectually.
So you've mentioned that supercomputers were a big unlock when going down this path of building a stellarator. Is that synonymous with AI, or has kind of like this AI revolution that's been ushered in, has that made your life easier, or is that different from the type of commuting that you're doing?
Yeah, it's a big deal. At the same time, worth mentioning where it's important and where it's a bit fluffy. It's important because it accelerates things like coding and design integration. And those are big deals when you look at, if you Google W7X, you get a feeling for these twisty geometries and the complex interactions of a cryostat and the magnets and the structures and all of that. That's massively supported by simulation. So when I think about supercomputers, I think more directly about simulation and generally simulation power, which is fundamental if you're trying to explore many things. When you explore many types of simulations, many people talk about computational statistics in a more hyped language that's machine learning in many ways. So it is a big deal. Honestly, just AI in terms of coding, massive speed up. I would never want to say that that's just hyped. At the same time, the idea that all designs of fusion devices would be designed by AI, we're not quite close, neither Proxima nor anyone else. But the tailwind is massive. And so when you think, is fusion how many years away? Well, maybe the tailwinds actually make it harder to estimate. The design capabilities, I think they will be effectively automated by AI in the near term. Like we're really quite not that far off. The manufacturing also has to be enabled by better simulation tools, better capabilities. So that's where our focus also is.
What kind of keeps you up at night? Like, what's the hardest problem that you're trying to deal with of all these very difficult problems? Like, is it the cryostat? Like, what is the one thing, if there is a one thing that is the toughest nut to crack?
Can I cheat and say
You
three?
can cheat, please.
I have a lot of dreams, and
Yes.
some of them, they all involve actually solving things rather than just worrying about them. The first one is magnets. So we're trying to develop some of the most advanced superconducting magnets humanity has ever made. That's our most closest, most important milestone ahead of us. In about 18 months, we'll show a magnet of the right power and scale. So that's literally what we're manufacturing right now. The next thing is about materials. So the ability of materials to survive the harsh conditions inside a stellarator. That relates to how long the inside of a stellarator can survive in this fusion power plant environments. Relates also to maintenance and to really practical economic questions. And then the third major R&D domain, let's say that's really crucial for us, is in how you make the heaviest form of hydrogen, so-called tritium. Tritium is not a natural resource, so you have to figure technology to make that tritium. That's what people call a blanket, a fusion blanket. It's very hard. We have, ways to go about this. We're doing R&D worldwide, not just Proxima, but those are some serious nuts that we need to crack. One by one, milestone by milestone. No panic. We got this.
Well, I don't know how you fall asleep.
I know, seriously.
I don't sleep very much.
You're sleeping. You're like, all right, I gotta build this thing. I am curious as you're talking about building stellarators and magnets and stuff. Like, if I went into your factory or lab, like, what does it look like? Are there people in big white coats? Like, what?
No, it's all a mess. We're working on magnets mostly. So most of the hardware, let me say, it's two categories of things. One is making our own cable. So imagine a circumference yay big, and in that we try to run 50 kiloamperes, an enormous amount of current in a small surface area. And then we take those cables and we make magnets. And so there are big plates of metal and these things that look like copper, but they're not quite copper, and it's not all of copper at least. And we figure out how to manufacture this in a way that lets us do it fast enough. And that fast enough relates to the other side of the hardware work that we're doing, which is learning how we can assemble a stellarator faster than has ever been possible. And the speed at which you assemble, it's not just about doing R&D as fast as possible. The product that we're trying to develop, that we're trying to deploy commercially, needs to be, we can't afford to sign a contract for a power plant and then say, see you next decade, we'll get it to you in a nice package. You have to actually be able to assemble this in 3 years or thereof, so that you can develop a gigawatt scale system of the order. It needs to be less than 5 years. That's quite clear. So we're working on assembling these things, learning through iteration in the lab and figuring out the precision that we need to achieve, which is pretty fun as well.
That's what I saw when I was researching stellarators, is that the alignment is so important. Like you're talking about a meters long thing, but
that's right.
You have to line things up to millimeter precision. Is that obviously it's difficult, but is that like a top difficulty as well?
It's not anymore. So
okay.
In W7X, so the stellarator that has been built in northern Germany, they're the optimized, let's say the tolerances in how you take this big non-planar superconducting magnets. You have to lift them, place in oblique position, and then make sure that they don't move when you cool them, and then you have a getting that to within 1.5 millimeter of tolerances was an insane challenge. And the fact that this machine has ever been built and actually works is some sort of marvel of engineering, spectacular. We don't have to do that to the same extent.
Okay.
And the reason is, when W7X was designed, tolerances were kind of an afterthought. So they sort of came up with the components and then they calculated, okay, what's the tolerance? Can we do it? And then they managed to do it. We are now able to optimize a design such that we can increase the tolerances. So now designing a stellarator where you can have tolerances of the order of centimeter is much more feasible. It has become a trade-off. So you can get a perfect plasma, but really terrible engineering, or you can get the opposite way around, or you come down among humans and you say, okay, life is not about 0, 1, it's actually somewhere in between, and you don't end up with 1.5 millimeters of tolerances.
Okay, so we got one more question. This might be the toughest one at all, but you spent most of your life in Europe and then you went to MIT for 3 years. 5 years. What was your favorite thing about Boston?
Maybe the Muddy Charles, so the pub at MIT.
See,
was a
he
good
was looking for a beer too.
It makes it look like I have been at that pub very many times. That's not the case. I was mostly hiding in the darkness of my physics department.
But you snuck out a little bit.
But it was good.
So that was the one part of Boston you saw.
That's one part. Maybe the runs along the Charles River.
Yeah.
Also very good. Something I do miss. And generally the environment of Cambridge, Massachusetts was fantastic. I mean, the density of interesting people, the number of things to do. Again, the beauty of it is that you can't have it because there is all this interesting stuff, but you're stuck. You have to be heads down and actually do your PhD.
It's kind of like looking at the ski slopes out here in Davos.
Something like that. You can't have it all. That's life.
All right, Francesco, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like my brain is awash in plasma in physics. Probably not to the extent that yours is, but thank you so much for speaking with us and good luck with everything.
Thank you, guys. Pleasure.